On my 21st birthday, I found myself the center of attention in the living room of our family home. Relatives, neighbors, and business partners of my father, Martin Grant, gathered around me. All of them, dressed in elegant suits and evening gowns, holding glasses of sparkling champagne, eagerly awaited an important announcement my father had prepared for his sons. My older brother, Jiren, as always, exuded confidence, standing beside me like a stone statue. When Jiren, his name was called, the room erupted in loud applause. My father handed him the keys to a luxurious Rolls-Royce Phantom, which gleamed under the spotlights in the driveway like a precious gem. In addition, he announced the creation of a trust fund in Jiren's name, amounting to $2,300,000. The public's delight was indescribable. People congratulated him, clapped him on the back, and camera flashes blinded him as he got behind the wheel of his dream car. Then all eyes turned to me, as if spotlights had shifted to a new target. My heart pounded wildly in my chest. For over many years I had wondered if my father saw me as a son worthy of carrying our family name. At that moment, he pulled something from his leather bag that caused the crowd to whisper in confusion. It wasn't car keys, a bank check, or even an elegantly wrapped gift. He handed me an old, battered brown suitcase, as if found in an abandoned bus station, with scratches and a broken handle. His face remained impassive, as if carved from stone. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "You'll understand when the time comes." Silence fell over the room, as if time had stopped. I tried to force a smile, but inside I felt humiliated and insulted. Meanwhile, Jiren revved the engine of his new Phantom, basking in the congratulations of the guests, while I stood there, an absurd figure, holding that old suitcase like a useless prop. That night I convinced myself that the suitcase meant nothing, but despite that, I couldn't get rid of it. For years I carried it with me, moving from place to place, scraping by with odd jobs in cheap motels and dead-end positions. It became a heavy burden I couldn't shake, an unresolved enigma that haunted me. Then, last week, after 6 long years of contemplation and doubt, I finally decided to open it. What I discovered inside shocked me and brought me to my knees, as if I had been struck down. I grew up in a family where outward polish and prestige meant everything. My father, Martin Grant, was a man of high stature. He built his fortune from scratch, dealing in real estate and investments, and in our town he was revered like a king. At every dinner party, every charity gala, and every Sunday brunch, he was the person whose opinion everyone craved to hear. He wore his power like a crown, sharp suits, polished shoes, and a voice that resonated through any room like thunder. People feared him as much as they respected him. My mother, Clara, was his complete opposite. She had a gentle soul, always spoke softly, and sought peace. Where my father commanded, she comforted. She never contradicted him in front of others. But when we were alone, she would put her arm around my shoulders and whisper words of encouragement, as if trying to heal the wounds inflicted by his coldness. And then there was Jiren, my older brother, who was 2 years my senior. From early childhood, Jiren was the golden child. He had my father's strong jawline, his self-assurance, and the ability to walk into a room and instantly command everyone's attention. Teachers praised him, coaches promoted him, and girls adored him. My father beamed with pride every time Jiren succeeded. I was proud of my brother, but I couldn't help but notice that my father's attention never shifted to me. I was quieter and more thoughtful. I preferred books to noisy parties, ideas to bragging. My father never said it directly, but I always felt that for him, my quietness was a sign of weakness. I tried my best, studied harder, worked tirelessly to earn his approval, but Jiren never needed to. Yet, no matter how much effort I put in, his eyes never lit up for me the way they did for my brother. This difference between us became painfully obvious on my 20th birthday. My father, who loved grand gestures, decided to throw a spectacular party at our mansion. It wasn't just a family celebration, but a true spectacle. Politicians, business partners, distant relatives, and even neighbors who had never spoken to us suddenly appeared in tuxedos and evening gowns, sipping champagne under chandeliers that sparkled like stars. I remember standing on the staircase, looking at the crowd, and feeling like a guest at my own party. In the festive glow of the evening, Jiren reveled in the universal attention. He effortlessly greeted guests, his handshakes confident, and his jokes elicited genuine laughter. He carried himself with dignity, as if born to be an heir, and each of his successes only highlighted my own invisibility. However, deep down, a hope flickered that this evening my father would finally notice me, that perhaps he had something for me too, something that would confirm my significance. When my father stepped onto the stage and invited Jiren forward, the hall erupted in applause. In a solemn ceremony, he handed Jiren the keys to a brand-new Rolls-Royce Phantom, its silver body reflecting the spotlights. Then came the announcement of a trust fund of $2,300,000 intended to secure Jiren's future. The crowd's excitement knew no bounds. Whistles, applause, and shouts of the lucky recipient's name merged into a single jubilant chorus. I, too, applauded, though inside, everything tightened with pain and resentment. My brother gave me a smug smile, as if the universe had confirmed his exceptionality. Then my father turned to me. Holding my breath, I felt my heart pound wildly. From his leather bag, my father pulled out an old, worn suitcase, covered in scratches and with a broken handle. Without any expression, he extended it to me, saying in a flat, dispassionate voice, "You'll understand when the time comes." Silence fell in the hall, broken only by quiet whispers. Some guests chuckled softly, others awkwardly averted their gaze. I stood there, paralyzed, clutching the suitcase, feeling my face burn with humiliation. My father, as if nothing had happened, turned back to the guests. Jiren, meanwhile, started the engine of his Phantom, and the crowd rushed outside to admire the luxurious car. I remained standing in the middle of the hall, next to my mother. She placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Don't let this break you. He has his reasons." Her words were full of sympathy, but they couldn't quell the pain. At that moment, it felt as though my father had publicly declared my insignificance. Late that night, after the guests had departed and silence settled over the mansion, I sat in my room, staring at the suitcase. I tried to convince myself that it was some kind of riddle, a test of patience or humility, but anger gnawed at me from within. I imagined Jiren planning a trip in his Phantom while I was left with only old junk. I wanted to throw the suitcase away, to prove it had no power over me. But something in my father's gaze when he handed it to me prevented me from doing so. So I kept it. I carried that suitcase throughout my adult life, like an anchor dragging me down. Moving from one apartment to another, sleeping in cheap motels, I always took it with me. People would ask why I lugged around that old suitcase, but I had no answer. I would only say it was a gift from my father. But deep down, I hoped it held the answer to who I was meant to become. In the years that followed, I scraped by with odd jobs, barely making ends meet. I watched Jiren's life, full of luxury and entertainment, through social media photos, while I counted every penny to buy food. I resented my father, but I couldn't stop thinking that the suitcase might mean something more than just humiliation. I never opened it. For years it stood at the foot of every bed I slept in, silent and heavy, as if urging me to face the truth. But each time I thought about opening it, fear overwhelmed me. What if there was nothing inside? What if it only confirmed my worst fears, that my father truly considered me nothing? This fear held me captive, and I carried the suitcase like a curse until the day I could no longer ignore it. After my 21st birthday, life took a path I never could have imagined. That night marked the beginning of a family rift that never healed. Jiren's future was clear and full of opportunities, while my own narrowed to a struggle for survival. I had no insurance, no trust fund, no car, no prospects. There are moments in life when fate seems to test one's resilience, questioning all hopes and aspirations. This was precisely the situation the protagonist found himself in, confronting a sense of utter helplessness and missed opportunities. The only thing he had left after a painful clash with reality was the old suitcase, handed to him by his father at a moment of public humiliation. This object became a symbol of his current predicament, a reminder of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Initially, the hero tried to convince himself that what had happened didn't really matter. He enrolled in community college and took on several part-time jobs to pay for his studies. He had to stock shelves in stores, work in diners, and move heavy boxes in warehouses. At the same time, his brother Jiren enjoyed life, posting photos with celebrities, vacationing on exotic islands, and hosting parties that made local headlines. Each time the hero saw his brother's smiling face next to an expensive car, a fire of envy and resentment ignited within him. He tried to convince himself that he didn't need such things, but deep down, he felt abandoned and forgotten. The suitcase, received from his father, was always nearby. It stood in the corner of every cheap apartment the hero rented, and then in every motel room he could barely afford. People constantly inquired about its contents. Colleagues at work joked, asking what was inside when he brought it into the break room. Friends he made for short periods would kick the suitcase and say it looked empty. The hero would joke back, but the truth was far more complex. He himself didn't know what was inside and was afraid to find out. Opening the suitcase meant crossing a line he wasn't ready for. If it turned out to be empty or filled with useless junk, it would confirm his worst fears. His father had given him nothing. If there was something valuable inside, the hero feared he wouldn't be able to handle it. So, he carried the suitcase with him year after year, and the burden grew heavier. His mother tried to comfort her son. She visited him in his modest apartments, bringing homemade food wrapped in foil. She would glance at the suitcase and sigh, her eyes full of unspoken words. One evening during a shared dinner at a wobbly kitchen table, she said, "Eli, your father's methods might seem cruel, but they are never without reason. He sees something in you that he doesn't see in Jiren. Don't take that suitcase as an insult." His mother's faith in his father only irritated the hero further. He wanted to believe her, but didn't understand why love had to be so enigmatic. Why couldn't his father just say, "I believe in you"? Why was his faith expressed in the form of abandonment? Meanwhile, Jiren continued to revel in his success and made sure his brother knew it. At one family dinner, when the hero was barely making ends meet, Jiren smirked and said, "How's life in the motel, little brother? Maybe Dad's suitcase has a magic trick, like pulling coins out of thin air. You should open it. Maybe it'll give you money for dinner." The family laughed. His father remained silent, and his mother squeezed his hand under the table, but it didn't lessen the pain. The hero continued to move from one dead-end job to another, spending time and energy just to survive. The suitcase was always with him. At night, when loneliness became unbearable, he would sit on the edge of the bed and run his hand over the scratches on its surface. He wondered who had carried this suitcase before him, how it had become so beaten and worn. Sometimes, he felt the suitcase was like himself, worn out, ignored, but still holding on. Its weight became a symbol. It reminded him of what the hero lacked, the love and recognition he had been denied. But at the same time, the suitcase became a source of peculiar strength. No matter how hard things got, the hero didn't throw it away. Some part of him, buried under anger and doubt, believed that perhaps his father was right. Perhaps he wasn't meant to understand yet. However, carrying the suitcase had its consequences. People looked at the hero as strange. Landlords asked why he was moving with only one bag. Colleagues spread rumors that he was hiding something illegal. One evening, returning to his motel room after working at a gas station, the hero found the door kicked in. His heart sank with fear. The TV was gone, things were scattered, but the suitcase remained untouched in the corner. The hero remembers looking at it and thinking, "Even thieves know it's worthless." Those difficult years left an indelible mark, breaking me down to the core. Sleepless nights were tormented by hunger, and each morning brought uncertainty about the future. But the suitcase remained my constant companion, like an ominous reminder of an unfinished story. I hated it with all my soul. Fear gripped me at the mere sight of it, but letting it go was beyond my power. By 27, I had been dragging this cursed burden for 6 years, clad in an armor of bitterness and convincing myself that my father had assigned me the role of a guinea pig while making Jiren his sole heir. The suitcase had become the last enigma, a thin thread connecting me to a family I no longer felt a part of. And then, one night, in a shabby roadside motel, a turning point arrived. Life was spiraling downwards. I was tired of a miserable existence, of feeling like a ghost in my own family's history. My gaze fell upon the suitcase by the bed, and I realized that fleeing from it was no longer possible. The fear that had paralyzed me for years suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the weight of this cursed suitcase. It was that night that I made the final decision to open it. The night I decided to open the suitcase began like many others. I was 27, living a meager existence in a rundown motel on the outskirts of a desolate town. The flickering neon sign buzzed annoyingly outside the window, the carpet reeked of cheap cigarettes, and the thin walls did little to muffle the neighbors' arguments. This place could hardly be called home, and none of my numerous shelters over the past few years had offered a sense of comfort. That evening, I sat at a rickety wooden table in the corner of the room, staring intently at the suitcase by the bed. In the dim light, its scuffed leather edges seemed even darker. For 6 long years, it had been my unwelcome companion. I had dragged it with me through train stations, motel lobbies, and grimy stairwells. I cursed it, ignored it, avoided it, but never abandoned it. My father's words, spoken on the night of my birthday, resurfaced in my memory. "You'll understand when the time comes." I repeated them aloud, as if testing their sound in the silence of the room. Now they resonated differently, not as a riddle from a man eager to humiliate me, but as a command. I poured myself some cheap whiskey from a half-empty plastic bottle on the nightstand. My hands trembled betrayingly, revealing my agitation. The tremor wasn't caused by cold or fatigue, but by the realization that the decision I had long avoided was now squarely before me. This suitcase was no longer just an object. It had become a symbol of everything I didn't know about myself, everything that caused fear regarding my place in the family. To open it meant confronting the truth, and after that, there would be no turning back. I walked to the bed and sat on its edge. I placed the suitcase on my lap and ran my hand over its rough surface. The handle was cracked, the latches rusted, but it still held together. I tried to imagine what my father was thinking when he handed it to me. Why had he chosen this path for me, while Jaren was presented with the whole world on a silver platter? I remembered my mother, her pitying gaze and quiet whisper that my father had his reasons. I remembered Jaren, who never missed an opportunity to mock me, flaunting his wealth and ridiculing my struggles. All those nights I fell asleep hungry, all those days I worked to exhaustion, all those moments I felt invisible, flooded my memory. My entire life, it seemed, revolved around this single item, this suitcase that haunted me like a shadow. I laid the suitcase on the bedspread and leaned closer. My fingers felt the metal latches, stiff with rust and cold to the touch. I tried to open one, but it wouldn't budge. My heart tightened painfully. I stopped, pulled my hand back, and stared at the suitcase. Doubt crept back into my soul. What if there was nothing inside? What if it was just a cruel joke, a way for my father to ensure I spent my life chasing something that didn't exist? I stood up and began pacing aimlessly around the room. The neon light outside cast red and blue reflections on the walls. My reflection in the mirror above the dresser looked tired and almost broken. I whispered to myself, "What are you so afraid of?" The answer came instantly. I was afraid that opening the suitcase would finally prove my worthlessness in my father's eyes. The loneliness pressed down on my shoulders like an unbearable weight. Fleeing from the truth had become unbearable. The fear of potential discoveries had long paralyzed my will, but now, the fear of aimlessly wasting my life was stronger. If the suitcase turned out to be empty, that would be the final straw. If there was something significant inside, perhaps it would shed light on many questions. My trembling hands rested on the dusty surface. My throat was dry with anticipation. Closing my eyes, I remembered myself as a small boy, seeking approval in my father's shadow. I also remembered the man I had become now, scarred by life's storms, but still standing. And of course, the voice that had haunted me for the past 6 years. "You'll understand when the time comes." My eyes snapped open, and I whispered, "The time has come." With a sharp movement, the first latch opened, its click echoing in the silence. My heart pounded in my chest. The second latch yielded with a metallic clang. For a moment I froze, staring at the closed lid. My breathing grew heavy, my body tensed as if preparing to leap into an abyss. My fingers gripped the edge of the lid, and I slowly began to lift it. The creak of the hinges filled the room with the scent of old leather and dust, and with it, the weight of years lifted. My gaze was fixed on the dark opening that concealed the contents. In that instant, I knew my life would change forever. When the lid creaked open, something inside me broke. There were no wads of cash, no glittering jewels, no hidden key to a luxurious car. At first glance, the contents of the suitcase were even disappointing. Neatly folded old worn notebooks with faded covers and frayed edges. Beside them, a bundle of envelopes tied with rough twine. And on top of it all, a single envelope with my name, written in my father's clear, familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I picked it up. For years I had cursed this suitcase, thinking it was just an insult, and now it contained the first thing my father had ever addressed personally to me. Yellowed paper, bold ink, every stroke of the pen, deliberate and precise. I peeled back the flap and tore open the envelope. Inside lay a letter, my father's words looking straight into my soul. Elior, if you are reading this, it means you have carried this suitcase long enough to understand its true meaning. Your brother was given money because that is what he values. You, however, received this because you are destined for something greater. Wealth without wisdom is a heavy burden, not a gift. These journals hold the history of our family. My mistakes, your grandfather's struggles, every failure and lesson that created what we own now. I could not entrust this to Jiren. He would never read them. But I believe you will. You will understand them when the time comes, and then you will gain something far greater than money. You will gain a legacy. I read the letter 3 times before the meaning of the words finally registered. A lump formed in my throat, my vision blurred, and I sank to my knees on the cold carpet. All the years of resentment and disappointment erupted in a flood of tears. I thought my father despised me, that he humiliated me for sport. But in reality, he had entrusted me with something priceless. Wiping my face, I opened the first notebook. It belonged to my grandfather and was filled with sketches of land plots, notes on failed deals, and reflections on the value of perseverance. He wrote about nights spent in his car to save every dollar to buy his first plot of land. He described the humiliations and mockery in boardrooms, the pain of loan rejections, but also the lessons learned from every setback. The second notebook belonged to my father. I had never seen him so vulnerable. He wrote about lost deals, moments when bankruptcy loomed, the loneliness of building an empire when no one believed in its success. He described the pain of losing his father and the fear of not living up to his expectations. He admitted his mistakes, pride and anger, but every page was permeated with determination. As if awakening from a long sleep, the hero realized that his father's harsh upbringing was not dictated by cruelty, but forged by life's difficulties, much like his grandfather had carved his own path. Jiren received wealth because he sought nothing else, while the hero received the suitcase, which became a symbol of a hunger for life, that insatiable thirst that once drove his father. In his hands was a bundle of letters, tied with twine, addressed to the hero at different stages of his life. Each message, written on birthdays he had missed, contained advice never spoken aloud by his father. In letters for his 18th, 21st, and 25th birthdays, his father confessed the severity of his methods, fearing that he would spoil his son too much, lest he become like Jiren, mired in comfort and superficiality. Elior, I chose you not for weakness, but for strength, one of the letters read. A man who had carried an empty suitcase for years without losing hope had already learned the price of patience. When the world turns its back on you, remember that survival itself is proof of your worth. This knowledge will be your compass when money runs out. After reading the letters, the hero felt his world crumble. The anger that had long possessed him gave way to something heavier yet pure. Bitterness, pride, and a strange relief mingled together. His father had not abandoned him, but had entrusted him with the most valuable thing, the essence of their lineage. Remembering Jiren, his luxurious phantom, his friends attracted by wealth but not loyal to him, the hero realized that his brother had received only riches, but not responsibility. He, however, had faced difficulties, but with them, wisdom that would outlast any car or trust fund. Sitting on the motel floor, surrounded by journals and letters, the hero felt a sense of purpose for the first time in years. This was not an end, but the beginning of his journey. That night, he vowed to honor his father's gift, to study every page, absorb every lesson, and create something of his own, not to prove his father right or to compete with Jiren, but to step out of the shadows and continue the legacy in his own way. The morning after opening the suitcase brought change. The motel walls were still dull yellow, the carpet still smelled of smoke, and the air conditioner hummed in the window. But inside the hero, a transformation had occurred. For the first time in years, he no longer felt like a victim, but like a person who knew where he was going. The day was spent reading journals and letters. Each story immersed him in the history of his family. His grandfather's words spoke of perseverance in the face of humiliation. His father's reflections revealed a man forged by setbacks and striving to pass on his resilience. By the end of the day, the hero understood that the suitcase was not a rejection, but an inheritance he needed, though wrapped not in ribbon, but in struggle. He decided to visit his mother, the only one who had always tried to comfort him, even if she couldn't change his father's methods. In his hometown, she still lived in the mansion that once seemed like a palace, and now a relic of a past life. She greeted her son with open arms. Seeing the journals and letters on the table, her eyes filled with tears. Picking up one of the letters, she whispered, "He always loved you, Elior. He just didn't know how to show it the way I do." They spent hours together, reading excerpts from the journals aloud, laughing at younger versions of his father and grandfather, mourning their mistakes. For the first time, the son felt such closeness with his mother. She saw not a broken man, but a man who had finally discovered the truth. But the hero knew that another part of this story involved his brother. Jaren continued to live a lavish life, showcasing expensive cars and private jets. However, there was a visible anxiety in his eyes. He had money, but no purpose. The hero told his brother about the journals, the suitcase, the lessons his father had hidden in plain sight. At first, Jaren brushed it off, laughing, but after hearing an excerpt from a letter, his smile vanished. He apologized and left without a word. In that moment, the hero realized the difference between them. Jaren was given everything except the hunger, without which there is no growth. He, on the other hand, was given a burden, and by carrying it, he learned resilience, patience, and the value of legacy. Transformation through legacy, from rejection to a source of strength. What the hero had long despised unexpectedly became the solid foundation of his inner strength. In the following weeks, he embarked on transforming his life. Abandoning dead-end jobs, he immersed himself in studying specialized journals, as if they were vital textbooks. Carefully taking notes and developing strategies, he began to apply the acquired knowledge in practice. He took on small projects, experimented with new ideas, and gradually gained momentum. Every success, no matter how minor, was perceived as a deserved victory, and every failure served as a clear lesson, guiding his subsequent actions. The hero began to share his story with others. Initially, these were friends curious about the unusual suitcase, then colleagues, casual acquaintances from cafes, and eventually entire groups of people who invited him to speak. Each time he told the story, he observed a similar reaction: disbelief at the experienced cruelty, keen interest in the contents of the suitcase, and relief when the truth was revealed. People resonated with it, for everyone carries their own burden, the meaning of which is not always clear. Everyone knows how difficult it is to question the value of one's own efforts. The suitcase was a symbol of the hero's burden, but it also became a testament to his resilience. One evening, alone with the suitcase once more, he looked at it no longer as a source of fear, but as a reminder of the journey he had undertaken. Touching the worn leather surface, the hero quietly said, "Now I understand." The essence was not in the money, luxurious cars, or recognition that accompanied his brother's success. The main thing was resilience and the proof that true value is not simply given, but revealed in the willingness to carry a heavy burden. Looking back, the hero reevaluates the years of hardship and loneliness. They were not lived in vain. These trials became the fire that forged him into a man capable of carrying a legacy, not just squandering an inheritance. His father chose him not for weakness, but because he was strong enough to bear this burden. The main lesson was that gifts that seem cruel can turn out to be the preparation needed for future challenges. The heaviest burden one must carry can become the key to finding freedom. A father's love is not always expressed in hugs or praise. Sometimes it takes the form of a suitcase handed over in front of many people, a burden whose meaning is revealed only when one is ready to open it. That moment arrived, and it changed everything. This is a narrative about how an old, battered suitcase, carried through years of struggle, became a father's greatest gift. It taught the hero that wealth without wisdom quickly disappears, but wisdom creates wealth that lasts forever. Sometimes, what we hate the most shapes us into who we are destined to become.